She had flaming red lips and wore a low-cut black dress. Her elegant steps, black stockings, and high heels. Her brown curly hair became even more charming in the sun. Her tall figure stood out from the crowd on the street. People on the street looked at her sideways, and some even forgot to walk, and all stopped to admire her excessive face. The lawyer didn't know that he had taken the newspaper upside down, and some people couldn't take their eyes off from beginning to end. She ignored the expressions of the crowd and sat down at an empty table. Then she elegantly took out a cigarette from her bag, and without lighting it herself, more than a dozen hands reached out to her in an instant. However, her deep eyes seemed a little dull, because she was not her true self at this time. Not long ago, Malena still had long black wavy hair, and she was usually low-key and simple, without makeup. But because of her beauty and figure far beyond ordinary people, she has become the most beautiful woman in the town with absolute advantage. Until now, Renato still remembers the scene when he first met Malena. At that time, she was wearing a plain white dress, and her exquisite figure was particularly attractive in the sun. Even the sea breeze seemed to have a preference for her, gently blowing her charming hair. When Malena walked past the boys, they would quickly ride their bicycles, quickly rush to the next intersection, and then sit on the side of the road to watch her figure again. Each time they would follow several intersections in a row, and the plain white dress would rise and fall in the sun. Her every move attracted attention and aroused people's reverie, including Renato, who was just beginning to fall in love. Until there were no more intersections, they reluctantly looked at her back and stopped. Next, it was the turn of the men in the town to revel. Her every smile and frown made men intoxicated, and the lawyer didn't realize that he had held the newspaper upside down. The lieutenant's eyes never left her figure from beginning to end. The dentist shamelessly stepped forward to show his courtesy, because he could kiss the back of Malena's hand. And he was complacent, like a winner, but it really made other men envious. In that very simple and backward era, she wore the most fashionable short skirt and stockings. Stepping on high heels full of lustful temptations, like a goddess, she conquered this seaside paradise. Since the first time he met Malena, Renato often rode a bicycle and shuttled through every corner of the town, just to search for Malena's various styles and seductive figure. He also quietly became her little follower, following her and spying on her life. It was also because of his daily shrewd following that he saw the deep malice of the people in the town towards Malena. While the men coveted her body, they maliciously speculated that she had lost her virginity long ago. However, the endless jealousy of women made people unrecognizable. All kinds of vicious words lingered in their ears, and countless rumors were thrown at Malena. But Renato did not believe these rumors. He was always full of admiration in his youth. Sometimes he would directly wait in front of her door, looking forward to a chance encounter between the two. Finally, one day, Malena suddenly opened the door and asked Renato to buy some cigarettes for her. Renato immediately came forward when he saw this, but the coin in Malena's hand accidentally fell to the ground. When he bent down to pick up the coin, the scene in front of him made him unable to extricate himself. However, all this was just his fantasy. In order to connect with his goddess as soon as possible, Renato's desire to grow up became stronger and stronger. In order to make himself look like an adult, he even secretly stole his father's wedding trousers and changed them into long trousers. Because in Sicily, boys can only wear long trousers when they reach adulthood, and minors can only wear shorts. However, after his father found out about this behavior, he was severely disciplined. Even the beating did not stop him from missing Malena deeply. So that night he sneaked outside Malena's house again, climbed up the tree, and peeked into Malena's private life through the small hole in the window. Therefore, Renato realized that Malena was not the slut that others said. Instead, she missed her husband who joined the army every moment. Sometimes she would hold her husband's photo and dance to the melodious music in the house. Looking at her elegant figure, Renato's desire was also surging. For this reason, he hurried to the audio store the next day and bought the same record as Malena. Then at night, he listened to songs while imagining a happy life with Malena. However, when he was following her that day, he saw Malena cautiously walking into a man's house. This made Renato doubt his previous judgment. Is Malena really like what others said? Is she a casual woman? Depressed, he could only go to the cinema to entertain himself and imagined himself as the male lead in the movie, questioning the female lead Malena if she had a lover. But even so, he still couldn't let go of his grudge. So the next day, Renato followed Malena to the strange house again. As a result, when he climbed up the iron gate, he found that the man inside was just Malena's father. Renato laughed at himself after learning the truth, which made the goddess more impressed in his heart. Then he returned home and indulged in fantasy again. However, when Renato was immersed in it and couldn't extricate himself, he suddenly heard the news that Malena's husband died in the war. Due to excessive grief, Malena did not attend the memorial service. After the memorial service, Renato came to Malena's home again. He climbed over the wall skillfully and found Malena lying on the bed sobbing uncontrollably. Renato walked up to her softly, unable to help but feel distressed, and kissed her quietly. Then Renato gently told her, "I will always be by your side, and when I grow up, I will protect you for the rest of your life." However, all this was still her timid fantasy. Not long after that, she was forced to dress up as the Virgin Mary, standing on a parade car and traveling throughout the town. Because in the war years, the death of an individual in battle is a collective honor. Personal grief is mixed with political stance and ideology. The villagers in the town below the stage, on the surface, made a sign of the cross and prayed for Malena, but secretly criticized her as a war widow. Only Renato sympathized with her experience and situation from the bottom of his heart. However, all the men in the town were excited. Not only did they become restless in secret, but they also began to act recklessly in public. When he heard the insulting words from the men's mouths, he secretly added some ingredients to their teacups. When he heard women slandering Malena behind her back, he added some spices to their expensive handbags. But after doing all this, Renato still felt it was not enough. So he went to the church again and asked God to help take care of Malena for a few years until he grew up and was able to take over. Renato used to have a simple idea. He thought that men grew up when they turned 18. But now he has a better understanding of growing up. Growing up means gaining the ability to protect the beloved woman from being hurt. However, Renato, who is in adolescence, still understands love at the physiological level. So in order to satisfy his physical desires, he stole Malena's underwear when no one was paying attention. He fell asleep with the breath of the goddess that night, but was discovered by his father the next morning. His father was furious and disciplined him severely again. Family members who came after hearing the noise came to check, and his mother also scolded him severely. Renato could not escape his father's angry scolding after all. Later, his father sealed the doors and windows, trapping him at home. However, the stubborn Renato did not compromise, but went on a hunger strike every day. Finally, by pretending to be crazy, he regained his right to freedom. As soon as he went out, he rode his bicycle to Malena's door. Unexpectedly, in just a few days, this place was as crowded as a bus stop during the morning rush hour, and all kinds of men had already gathered. Among them, some openly revealed their lust, while others secretly sabotaged. On this day, Malena's father received an anonymous letter which accused, "Your daughter has had affairs with all the men in town." Although she did not believe this was true, the rumor was still unbearable for her. So from then on, he quit his job and cut off contact with Malena. Malena, who lost her husband and her father, became a real loner. In order to find a new support, she decided to date the most handsome lieutenant in town. That night, after a passionate kiss, the two officially established a romantic relationship. Witnessing the two lingering in the room, Renato compared his fingers to guns through the hole in the wall and shot the lieutenant countless times in his heart. However, when the lieutenant walked out of Malena's room, he ran into a drunk dentist. The dentist claimed to be Malena's fiancé and then put on a posture of a real boyfriend and slapped the lieutenant in anger. The lieutenant, who always had a strong self-esteem, immediately fought back, and the two immediately wrestled in the street and entangled endlessly. Suddenly, another woman rushed out in the dark, and this person was the dentist's wife. It turned out that she had long suspected that her husband had an affair with Malena, so she had been following him quietly. Although she still did not catch any substantial evidence this time, it was enough for her to vent. She first beat her husband, and then shouted at the window of Malena's residence, "Leave this place immediately and seduce other people's husbands." The next day, the news spread throughout the town. Everyone knew that the dentist was honest and simple, and the men were handsome and elegant. It must be Malena who took the initiative to seduce them. So Malena was sued in court for destroying other people's marriages. As she had no relatives and no one to rely on, Malena could only seek help from a lawyer. The attorney solemnly promised her, "With me here, you will be safe." The day of the trial came soon, and the court was crowded with spectators. However, they were not concerned about the right and wrong of the case itself, but tried to spy on the details of Malena's private life. The purpose is nothing more than to confirm her name as a slut and get some kind of morbid psychological satisfaction from it. At first, Malena was powerless to resist the malicious questioning of the judge. But what made her most sad was that after the lieutenant learned that she was involved in a lawsuit, fearing being implicated, he chose to draw a line with her. Fortunately, at the critical moment, the lawyer stepped forward and cleared her of her grievances with professional and detailed legal interpretations. After winning the lawsuit, Malena agreed to dance with the lawyer at home to repay her kindness. But the lawyer had long had bad intentions towards Malena, not only blatantly touching her during the dance. When he learned that Malena's pension had been suspended and she was unable to pay the remaining lawyer's fees, the lawyer directly forced her to repay the debt with her body. At first, Malena resisted to death, but the disparity in power forced her life to enter the cold winter. Renato, who was hiding outside the house and peeping, saw her miserable experience. However, due to panic, Renato accidentally fell from the tree and broke his right arm. Originally, Renato thought that as long as he was sincere, God would definitely agree to his request to protect Malena from harm. So he would go to the church to light candles every day. But after seeing his beloved woman being forced, Renato realized that sometimes gods could not be trusted. So he went to the church in a rage and smashed the arm of the saint's statue with his plastered hand. In the days that followed, Renato still used a telescope to spy on Malena's every move every day. But he unexpectedly discovered that the lawyer frequently went in and out of Malena's house, and the two even met in the car many times. All signs indicated that they were about to get engaged. Seeing that Malena was about to fall into the hands of others, the frustrated Renato sat alone on a dilapidated boat, as if his soul had been trapped in the waves forever and could no longer set sail. However, in order to relieve his inner depression, he chose to write a love letter to Malena in class. Although the letter was destined to be unsent, he was still serious and fully committed when writing it. Not only that, during the writing process, he imagined the teacher on the podium to look like Malena. When he saw Malena slowly walking towards him, he finally plucked up the courage and expressed his doubts. "Are you getting married?" This sentence almost made the teacher furious, and then Renato was dragged out of the classroom by the teacher's ear. But soon, things took a turn. When Renato was wearing trousers that symbolized his adult status, the lawyer's mother was furious when she learned about it and forced the lawyer out of the house. The reason was that she believed that marrying Malena would tarnish the family's reputation. The lawyer fled in a panic, causing the other men in the town to laugh. This lawyer, who lacked his own opinion and obeyed his mother's orders in everything, eventually had to take the initiative to break up with Malena. Originally in this relationship, Malena had always been in a passive state. Now it was her who was suddenly abandoned, but she had to endure all kinds of insults and slander. No one was even willing to give her a job, and no one was willing to buy her food. In poverty and hunger, she had to secretly trade with underground vendors. Renato was heartbroken when he found out, and he wanted to help this poor woman. But even though they had passed each other countless times, he still didn't have the courage to come forward and talk to her. Until this day, a large number of fighter planes suddenly appeared in the sky, and in an instant, all the residents of the town rushed into the air raid shelter like ants to avoid rounds of bombing. But there are always some elderly people with inconvenient legs and feet who were eventually buried under the ruins, including Malena's father. On the day of the funeral, almost all the men in the town came to see Malena's father off, just to feel Malena's breath up close during the comforting of the family members. Originally, Renato also wanted to take this opportunity to say the comfort that he had not dared to say before, but as soon as he walked up to Malena, he was violently pushed aside by the man behind him. But at this moment, Renato suddenly stopped paying attention to Malena's chest and figure and focused his eyes on her eyes and her haggard face. For Malena, without her family, she had no scruples. So if she could only survive by selling her body, she was willing to become a prostitute. In this way, in the dead of night, she cut off her long black hair with her own hands. Then she covered her body with lemon juice, truly turning herself into a delicious dish. And the reward for her first guest was just a plate of hard-to-swallow coarse grains. Renato's eyes were filled with tears when he saw it. After a while, Sicily was occupied by German fascists, and a familiar yet strange figure suddenly appeared in the town. This person was Malena with red hair and blue eyes. Now she has become a street girl that everyone flocks to. She not only won the admiration of countless men in the town, but also won the favor of German officers. However, watching her chatting and laughing with other men, and thinking about what she would do with other men, Renato couldn't stand it and fainted directly. His mother thought Renato had some strange disease, and the priest said he was a ghost. Only his father saw at a glance that he was an adult, and it was time to find an outlet for his desires. So when Renato woke up, he was immediately taken to a dream room by his father. Then he completed his first adult journey in his life with a woman who looked like Malena. Not long after, as the German Nazis were driven out of Italy, the American army drove a jeep into Sicily, and the people of the town lined the streets to welcome them. Renato also clapped hands with the soldiers in joy. However, just as everyone was immersed in the joy of victory, the dentist's wife suddenly shouted, "It's time for us to punish that whore." Then a group of women rushed up and dragged Malena out of the room by her hair. Then, in public, they beat and kicked her. The men who once coveted her now hid aside and kept silent, allowing Malena to have her hair cut and her clothes stripped. Helpless Malena cried for help, but no one was willing to lend a hand. She didn't even know what she had done wrong to be cut off from her life again and again. But those hideous abusers knew that it was all because of her beauty. It was her beauty that made them jealous, and it was jealousy that turned them into demons. The next day, with a shrill train whistle, Malena, wrapped in black, boarded a train to a distant place. She wanted to leave this sad place completely. When the train started, everyone leaned out to say their final goodbyes to their family and friends. Only Malena's window was closed, as if her heart had been completely sealed. Renato, who came to see them off, felt indescribable sadness as he watched the train going farther and farther away. But he soon adjusted his mood and threw the record representing Malena into the bottomless sea. The endless waves took the record far away and also put an end to Renato's youthful fantasy. For a period of time afterwards, the town remained as calm as dead water. Until one day, a one-armed man suddenly appeared, and this man was Malena's husband Mino. It turned out that he did not die in the war, but was seriously injured. At first, he planned to come back after his injury healed, but due to the turbulent war situation, in order to survive, he had to travel to various regions so that he finally returned to his hometown until now. However, what he never expected was that everything at home had completely changed. The once warm and sweet home was now occupied by a large number of homeless people. His once gentle and virtuous wife was not only missing, but also became a slut in the mouths of others. He wanted to try to find someone to ask the truth, but he was ridiculed again and again. Seeing that the hero who should have been admired by others had become a laughingstock in the mouths of everyone, Renato felt very uncomfortable, but he did not have the courage to tell the truth in person. So after thinking again and again, he decided to write down what he had seen in the past few years. Convey everything that Malena had experienced to Nino, who wanted to know the truth. Malena was not a slut. She had always been loyal to Nino. Although she did date different men, it was after she thought you were dead. Finally, Renato also attached the whereabouts of Malena. The next day, Nino followed this clue and embarked on a journey to find his wife. Time went by, and it was a year later. The town seemed no different from before. The lawyer was still the mama's boy who needed his mother to feed him, and the dentist would still whistle at the beautiful women passing by. The difference was that Renato had a girlfriend, and the two of them went to the square for a walk together that day. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the distance, and when Renato looked over, he found that it was Malena and Nino. They were walking towards the crowd with their arms around each other. No one expected that two people who were hurt by the times and fate. One day, they would be able to resolutely return here to find the dignity they had lost. Although Malena wanted to appear calm and fearless under the gaze of those familiar and hateful eyes, she stumbled unconsciously after all. Fortunately, she was no longer alone and had a stable support. However, even without the support of her husband, Malena would no longer have to endure the teasing of men and the jealousy of women as before. Because after only 1 year, her beauty and proud figure had worn away. This also meant that she was no longer attractive to men and no longer a threat to women. So when Malena carried a basket to buy vegetables at the busy market, the dentist's wife who had cut her hair took the initiative to greet her. After looking around and carefully observing the expressions of everyone, Malena nodded calmly and responded, "Good morning." Then, everyone began to show kindness. Some people stuffed clothes for her for free, and some actively helped her buy things. It seemed that nothing had happened before. The humiliation had not happened, the confrontation had not happened, and even the war had not happened. After buying all the daily necessities, Malena was ready to carry her things home. Just then, Renato rode his bike to catch up with her, and, like before, he was spying from a distance. Suddenly, when Malena's hand slipped while carrying the bag, the oranges inside scattered all over the floor. This time Renato did not hesitate and immediately ran up to help. Not only that, while picking up the oranges, he pretended to touch Malena's hand accidentally. However, this touch was not accompanied by any lust, but simply wanted to touch a life. A life that was still tenacious, even though it was covered in bruises. After saying goodbye to each other, Renato rode his bike in the opposite direction of Malena. The Beautiful Legend of Sicily was directed by Giuseppe Tornatore. Starring Monica Bellucci and Giuseppe Solfero, it was a drama film released in 2000. During World War II, Renato, who was in adolescence, developed an indescribable affection for Malena, the most beautiful widow in the town. But because he was timid and did not dare to communicate directly, he could only hide in the dark to follow and peek. At first, Renato could only see Malena's body, and he completed intimacy with her through constant fantasy. But slowly Renato saw a different Malena. He saw Malena's plight, the situation of a weak person, the covetousness of men for women, and the jealousy of women for women. And such a transformation also means that he has grown from a boy to a man. Well, today's movie sharing ends here. Welcome to like, comment, and forward. Thank you for your patience and look forward to meeting you next time.